Okay, so I'm going to start again. The bar mitzvah that took place on Monday was the grandson, Lev Bornfriend, the grandson of Doreen and Paul Bornfriend, who sponsored this shiur on whiskey, wine, whiskey, and halacha. And mazel tov to you and Doreen, and you should have much nachas. And it's a beautiful name, Lev, meaning the heart, that he should have the heart for the study of Torah and masim tovim and good deeds.
Thank you very much, Marshall, for your kind words.
And for Marvin, he's going to hold something up and show us something very quickly. Go ahead.
Hold it straight up.
Hold it straight up so we can see it.
Straight up.
Now hold the label so we can see what it is. Back it up a little.
There you go.
Okay, it's called McKillop's. McKillop's Choice Single Cask. Very, very nice.
And numbered. The bottle is numbered.
Numbered bottle. Okay, very good. So I'm going to talk about something about numbered bottles and this kind of a thing, and then I'm going to get on with the shiur. So a number of years ago, I've often spoken about this man. He's a dear friend, and he happens to be a Presbyterian minister in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and he's going to be retiring this year. And you can look him up. His name is Doug Rollwager. Now, he has an interesting life because Douglas discovered just around the time that I came to Beth David, about 21 years ago, that his grandmother, on his mother's side, was Jewish, living in Germany, and denounced her Judaism, was able to save herself through the war, got married to someone who was really mostly pretty much agnostic. So he was brought up with, being told he's Christian, but really never celebrated himself as being a Christian. He really just was, didn't really think about it until one day he went to a youth group and he found, he became Christian and decided that was the way for him. But then some 21 years later, he discovers he's Jewish. So the question is, what would Chazal, when I say the word Chazal, does anybody know what that means? Put your hand up or speak up if you want. Okay, so I'll tell you.
Chachamim zichronam livracha.
Correct. So Yitzchak gets the prize. He gets the prize. I don't know what the prize is yet, but you're going to get one. And it's
Scotch.
Exactly. Okay, Scotch.
A shot of Scotch.
Chachamenu zichronam livracha. Chachamenu means smart guys, wise people. Zichronam meaning a blessed memory. And that's what it means. But when we say the word Chazal, we're referring to, all of those scholars from the Mishnaic period, from the Mishnah, the Talmud, rabbinic literature, anything from the second Beit HaMikdash, from the second temple, until around the 6th century. And you'll hear that term often in the yeshiva world to say Chazal says. And, I remember years ago I heard this and I was thinking, who's this guy Chazal? I never heard of him. I've heard of the Rambam and the Ramban, but Chazal. And then I discovered that Chazal really is encompassing all of the Rabbeim, all of those rabbis of the time. So this person, Doug Rollwager, going back, introduced me to a Scotch, and it was called Little Mill. And Little Mill was in a cheap-looking green bottle, looked like a jug, and it was the youngest Scotch I ever had. It was an 8-year-old Scotch. I've heard of 12-year-old, I've heard of 10-year-old, I've heard of 20-year-old, 16, 18, whatever it is, but I never heard of an 8-year-old Scotch, so I thought this has got to be real Chazarai. Turned out it wasn't a Chazarai at all, it was actually very good. And doing the homework, Little Mill was one of the very, very first distilleries that opened up in 1776 in the lowlands of Scotland. And when this happened, through the generations from 1776, as most businesses from that time on, they change hands. They go through different ownerships. Sometimes big companies buy them out, and sometimes just another family buys it. And it went through different hands. It was bought by the Lagavulin company, the company that owns Lagavulin, whoever they are. And they had a great fire. And the fire burned down the distillery. And everything was destroyed except for some copper tubing and pipes. So they dismantled that and took it away and gave it to other distilleries or sold it or did whatever they could. But it was never rebuilt. So what happened to the barrels that were saved? Because don't forget, the distillery burned down, but there's always third-party bottlers that buy barrels that keep in their own warehouses and just sit on them for many, 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 many years. And 25 years later, they release it from the barrels and they bottle it and they go, we are going to bottle this and sell it later down the road as an investment as a 25-year-old scotch. Now, these companies that had these cheap, inexpensive, low bottom shelf selling barrels of Little Mill were now in possession of a scotch that could never be made again. A distillery from 1776 that it can never be duplicated or made again because it's gone. It's gone forever, burned down like the Beit HaMikdash itself. So there are people out there that are third-party bottlers and handlers and buyers. And one of those are two brothers, and their last name is Hart, H-A-R-T. And if you go to the liquor store, you will see bottles of scotch sometimes in the special sections that say Hart Brothers, bottled by Hart Brothers. They buy barrels from Lagavulin, they buy barrels from this company and that company and this company, and they take those barrels, and later on when it suits them, when the timing is right, they bottle them and they release it for whatever price they want or whatever the market will pay. So back then when Doug introduced me to Little Mill, I went out and I bought some, and I had different ones. I bought a 19-year-old and I bought a 21-year-old. You know, if someone just started listening now, they'd say, what's the Chazan talking? He bought a 19 and a 21-year-old. It's a good thing you know I'm talking about bottles here, right? Not Meidlach. But anyway, the point is that you have an appreciation for something that you can never have anymore. You can't get anymore. So when Marvin holds up this bottle and says it's a numbered bottle, imagine, let's say that bottle is worth $300, $500, and the distillery that made it burned down and you can never get it again. The value of that bottle goes up and up and up and up because now nobody even wants to open it because it's a collector's edition. It's become something that is invaluable to a collector who just wants it to sit on a shelf. And I'm thinking, what a waste of time. Before I die, I'd like to drink it and enjoy it. So I was given this bottle. I got this bottle, and there's two problems with it. One of the problems is, there it is, Hart Brothers, Little Mill, if you see. So this bottle sells now for $3,000 on the market. It's a $3,000 bottle because the distillery burned down, and you can't have it anymore. It doesn't exist. Hart Brothers, Little Mill. So from 1776, this distillery burned down, and I'm sitting here and I have two of these. I have a 19 and I have a 21. And I have another story later about another bottle of this that I'll tell you about. It's a side story, because you like a side story, right? This is all relating to nothing to do with kashrut, but it's a good side story. So the first problem is should I open up a $3,000 on the market bottle of scotch and drink it and enjoy it? With friends? Maybe. Or do I look at it and say, is this even kosher? Because look at the bottom of the bottle. If you look very closely, it says, what does it say? Sherry casked. It says, first sherry butt. I'm glad it's talking about a cask. And it says age 21 years. Well, is a scotch that contains sherry in it even kosher now? Because sherry is made from wine. And I can assure you that the wine, the grapes that they put in here were not pressed by Jews. So there's a lot of issues with this. I can tell you right off the bat, I don't have to get there because we're going to have other sessions. I started to look into the wine, whiskey, and halacha. And I said, we'll do a two-part session. Ava thought it was a good idea. We'll blame Ava. And I discovered that really this can be a 22-part session. So either we're going to be in for 2 parts or we're going to be in for 22 parts. I'm not sure yet because there's a lot to talk about. So I've spent the last year and change studying Halacha with webyeshiva.org, Rab Chaim Bravender's school. I give him a plug all the time because it's a wonderful, wonderful yeshiva in Yerushalayim. And you learn a lot about kashrut. You learn about the laws of mashgichim. You learn about yotzei v'nichnas, being able to go in and come out, and what is acceptable, and how do you know what's kosher if you left the room. And then on top of that, my dear friend who's with us today, Alex Roth, brought forward a wonderful book, which is by Harav Shraga Kalus, and it's called Wine, Whiskey, and Halacha. I'm going to give it a plug. It's a beautiful book. It talks all about the halachas in great detail as well. And I use it as a source. So I thank you so much for sharing that, because it's a wonderful, instead of going through all of the Gemaras and then looking at the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur and the Shach and the Taz, and you can come to this book and it gives you a lot of the not so simple opinions of what is considered kosher. So we're going to begin with wine. For those of you that attended the sessions weeks ago, and we talked about kashrut in general, we talked about kosher bread, and what if the bread is at a bakery and the bread was baked by a non-Jew? Can you eat that bread? Can you buy that bread? You're in a town and there's a bakery that is not kosher, and there's no kosher bakeries around. But there is a kosher bakery in the next town over. You have to go there. Some of the rabbis said, well, you can eat that bread if it's nicer than the one that's kosher that's being sold down the street. If it's a nicer bread. That's what the Gemara says. Imagine that, if it's a nicer bread. So what would that do? So we think of that. Then we learned about milk. And we talked about the interesting idea of milk. When a milk comes out of the cow and it's being milked, if a non-Jew is milking it and the Jew doesn't see him milking it, is it kosher? I didn't see him milking it. How do I know it's cow's milk? He says it's cow's milk. Maybe it's milk from a horse. I don't know what it's from, but it's not necessarily a cow. I didn't see it. And I know one thing. This man, Mr. Johnson, he's got pigs, horses, cows, donkeys. He's got everything on that farm. I don't know. I didn't see him milking it. Then Chazal, our teachers, say, well, if you are in the boundaries of the area and you see him milking it, but you're not watching him all the time, you're not on top of him, you're not on his shoulders looking to see everything he's doing. You're in a chair, you're sitting down, you're reading a newspaper. If you're in a chair and you're sitting down, you can't see him all the time, but you can see him whenever you want. And he knows that if you stand up at any given moment, you will see what he's milking. And the fear that he knows that you can stand up at any time and see what he's doing, he doesn't know. You're not saying to him, Mr. Johnson, at 2:15, I'm going to stand up and see what you're doing. Good. I know the Jew's going to stand up at 2:15, so until 2:11, I'm going to milk the pigs. It doesn't work that way. You're not telling him when you're going to milk, when you're going to stand up, when you're going to sit down. He doesn't know. You are yotzei, you're leaving, and you're nichnas, you're coming in. That's what a mashgiach is. This is the first declaration of a mashgiach. The milk, the person that's seeing the milking. So we're seeing somebody who is milking cows, and I say, good, he's milking cows. I can take a break. I'm going to sit down, but I'm not. He doesn't know when I'm going to come in. I'm going to come in. I'm going to stand up anytime I want. He's afraid. Why is he afraid? He's afraid because he's selling milk to all of the Jews in the area. And if the word gets out and I tell him, I saw Mr. Johnson milking a pig, nobody's going to buy milk from him. He's going to be out of business. He wants our business. He wants to sell it. He doesn't want to be put out of business. He's not going to risk his professional reputation. There's a Gemara term called a kfela. A kfela is a professional cook, where it says in the Gemara, if you're not sure when you're eating something whether it's kosher, whether it has beef stock in it. You know, I talked once about the onion soup. You go to a restaurant, you're sitting there and they say, we have onion soup. Is it vegetarian? Yeah, sure. How do you really know? I don't know. Maybe it has beef stock in it. They said in the Gemara, if you gave it to the professional and he tasted it for you and he said, my discerning taste says there is no beef stock in this. There is no chicken stock. It's only vegetarian. You are allowed to trust that kefela, that professional. Why should I trust him? How do I know he's not cheating me? Because that kefela is a professional and he will not risk his reputation and destroy his whole reputation over something like that. If he doesn't know, he'll say, my discerning taste can't tell the difference. I don't know. Better not eat it. Don't take a chance. But if he tells you that you can have it, it's vegetarian, according to Chazal, you can have it. Would we? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. That's for you to decide. I decided after the last class, I should not be telling any of you what to do. You have to do what it is that you want to do. I can tell you that basar b'chalav together, making meat and milk together, cooking it is against Torah. It's a Torah violation. But I can't tell you you're not allowed to go to McDonald's and have a cheeseburger. I can tell you, well, the rabbis would frown upon a cheeseburger from McDonald's, and you have to decide for yourself, should you go or shouldn't you go? But what is the importance of the halachaz? The halachaz is for somebody, not necessarily someone who only wants to live as a frum Jew. Because many of us are not always only interested in saying that we live as a frum Jew. You know, we want to make sure that we're not maybe drinking wine that is not kosher. I think, Ava, you brought the topic up originally. You want to make sure, the question is, how do I know? Am I allowed to drink? So there's a conservative opinion, by the way. The conservative Judaism says, everybody peaks up their interest, all of a sudden they sit up. You see when I say that? That you can drink a non-kosher wine if you're not making kiddush on it. If you're not saying a bori prayer, if you're not doing a sanctification. Well, why would they say that? They're saying it because in the conservative world, they already know that you're drinking it anyway. They don't have to tell you not to drink it. They know that when you go to cousin Ethel's house, she doesn't serve kosher wine, and you want a glass of wine for dinner, and you're not sitting there at a Pesach Seder, and you're not sitting there on a Friday night, and you're not sitting there, you're just having a glass of wine. So what was the fear of having a glass of wine that wasn't kosher? What was the whole fear? The fear was that you would be sharing, firstly, in a forbidden wine because of something called avodah zarah, idol worship. They were idol worshippers. We cannot drink something that was given to us by idol worshippers. But today, I don't know, when is the last time any of you met an idol worshipper? I haven't seen anyone on the street. I don't know any idol worshippers. We can't call Christians idol worshippers. We can't call Muslims idol worshippers. So I don't know any idol worshippers. So we have to find modern ways of keeping those Torah laws, those rabbinic laws, those fences protecting the Torah, the rabbinic rulings alive, or else everybody just runs amok. So what does that mean? Well, there's a decree, something called Stam Yenam. It was regarding the wine of a non-Jew because of avodah zarah, because of idols. Today you might say, we're more afraid of chatnut. We're more afraid of intermarriage. You get invited to the non-Jewish girl's house next door, and you sit down, and you drink a glass of wine with her, and then you have 2 glasses of wine with her, and one thing leads to another. Chatnut, intermarriage. The rabbis were afraid of intermarriage. They didn't want it. Why were they so afraid of intermarriage? Remember, after the destruction and even before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, we think, because we weren't around then, everybody was running around from, everybody had a beard, everybody was putting on tefillin, they were doing Torah, everybody was studying all day, they're all learning. No, they weren't. They were intermarrying, they were eating treif, they weren't behaving, they weren't, some of the some of the from people, I don't like it, but they say that was one of the reasons for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, was because the Jews weren't acting appropriately. Too much intermarriage. Well, they had to come up with some stringent rulings. So the Gemara, when I say the Gemara, I'm talking about the teachings in the Talmud, around the Talmud. They talked about all the decrees that would keep a distance. So what did they want, these rabbis? They wanted distance from you and non-Jews. Now, what does that mean? Today, not then, today. It means you get invited to a business lunch. It's a business lunch. And you're sitting there at a business lunch, and there are a lot of people there. There's women, there's men, nobody's Jewish, you're Jewish. Are you allowed to go to lunch with people that aren't Jewish and have a business meeting? 100%, of course you are. But it was separating us in distance for social occasions. We shouldn't be together socializing. We all know, many of us, including myself, have family members that are not Jewish. It's the way it is. Somebody marries somebody that converted into the family. Somebody marries a grandchild, marries a convert, a son, a daughter, a family. You marry a convert. I married a convert. I married a convert. So my wife, Laura's family, they're not Jewish. If I go over there and they offer me a coffee, can I have a coffee in a glass mug? Of course you can have a coffee. You're not supposed to drink the wine. Forget about the reasons of kashrut. Forget about whether it's kosher or it's not kosher. Drinking the wine that could lead to chatnut, if people were going over there and drinking it because of social interaction, that was considered to be forbidden. So what about when we talked before? Remember I talked to you about deriving benefit from a cheeseburger? And I said, what a ridiculous thing. I have a cleaning person who comes in the house to help out once every 2 weeks, and they do some cleaning. I'm giving you an example. And that cleaning person, I know that this person would like to have lunch. They're not Jewish. They don't keep kosher. So I stop off at the Burger King and I buy them, I think they'd like an onion rings and a milkshake. Might as well really trafe it up. Let's go to town here. And a bacon cheeseburger. Okay, let's go to town. Sounds delicious. I bring it home and I give her that to eat. She can eat it, but I can't give it to her because I'm deriving benefit. She works for me. You can't derive benefit from the cheeseburger. What about a non-kosher wine? Can I give a gift? Forget about drinking it. Can I go to the liquor store, buy a non-kosher bottle of wine? We're talking from a frum perspective here, not the conservative approach. Can I buy a non-kosher bottle of wine and give it as a gift to a non-Jew? Can I do that? I could give a non-kosher bottle of wine to a Jew. And if I give you a non-kosher bottle of wine, you could take that wine, you could either drink it or you could take it and re-gift it and give it to somebody else who isn't Jewish, because maybe you'll say, I don't drink non-kosher wines. But I derive benefit if I give you that bottle of wine. The answer was originally, no, you could not derive benefit. But then the rabbis came up with fences and said, well, maybe if the wine was treated in a process by Jewish authority that, so here comes an example. Can I give a kosher bottle of wine to a non-Jew? We know that, of course you can, right? Why not? Can I give the kosher bottle of wine to the non-Jew? He opens it up. He takes a drink. He says to me the next day, you know what? I like a dry wine. This wine's too sweet for me. So I put the cork back in it. I'm giving it back to you. You enjoy it. Can you do that? Celia says no. Why can't you do it, Celia? Unmute yourself and tell me why. You said no, so you must have a reason.
It depends what happened from the time it passed from your hands to his hands or her hands. besides just drinking it. Somehow something could have happened that wouldn't be kosher.
Okay, what could happen?
I don't know. A piece of meat fell into the wine bottle. I don't know.
But do you really think a piece of meat's going to fall into the wine bottle?
No, no,
So
I just don't want the wine back.
you don't want it back. So, the answer is that if it's uncorked, there was a whole Gemara on the Jewish owner of the winery has wine. Well, no, forget it. It's not. He has a wine store. Many years ago, they didn't sell wine in bottles. You went into the wine place, the market, whatever it was, and they had barrels. And the spigot on the bottom of the barrel, he'd open it up, and he would take out into your bottle. You went in with your own bottle, your jug, and he filled up your jug with the wine, and he closed the spigot, and he said, there's your kosher wine. We have a mashgiach on the premises. It's completely kosher. You put it into your bottle. You go home. Now you have kosher wine for Shabbos and Yontif. Okay? Well, you're going home with that wine, and you know it's kosher because it's a Jewish owner. The Jewish owner is he's from, and forget about from. Let's use, he's Torah observant. You know that this person is Torah observant. They're watching the wine. They're pressing the wine. They're making the wine. They're watching the wine. They're putting the wine in the barrels. And then he gives you wine. And you go home with the wine. But one day, you're there. And you are going up towards the wine store where the barrels are. And you see that the owner is coming in. He's pulling in with his horse and wagon. And he gets off the horse and he walks into the wine, his own business. And you're walking behind him. And you're asking yourself a question. How do I know now that the wine that was all sitting there in his store wasn't tampered with by the non-Jews working in the store, in the environment? How do I know that that wine is kosher? It's ridiculous that we think this way. And it's all because of intermarriage and chatnut. And I find it interesting because that's what they had to worry about. This was the biggest issue, not the way Jews really behave, which is sometimes not the best way. But yet this is where they were setting parameters. So the answer is, we don't know what happened to that wine. Now, if the owner of the wine store walks into the store, just walks in, unannounced, the question becomes, when he left, did he tell the people that were working there in the winery, I'm leaving, I'll be back in exactly 2 hours? If he says that, that's not good. If he locks the door and he says, I'm going to Asia, I'll be back in 3 months, watch the store, that's not good. But if he leaves, doesn't say anything, and he goes, the people working in the store are supposedly afraid to do anything that isn't proper. They know the rules, and they won't do anything because they don't want to lose their job. They want to keep their job. The owner came in unannounced. He didn't say when he's going to come, whoa, quick, Freddie, don't tamper with the wine anymore. Shloimi's back. It doesn't work that way. They're afraid. They know that Shloimi's going to come in at any moment. So they don't do anything. That's called Yotzei V'nichdas. It's the acting of a mashgiach without having an actual mashgiach there. That's how it works in many places. We think that there's always a mashgiach sitting there in every factory, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not true. Many of these companies in Asia receive certification, and what happens is the mashgiach is told, you have to go there during the year unannounced, even on a Shabbat, if the factory runs on Shabbat, to see how they're making the tuna fish or canning the cans or the peas or whatever it is. You have to go even on Shabbat. Even on a Yontif, they can go and walk in. Maybe it's closed on Saturday and Sunday. If it's closed on Saturday, The mashgiach has to fly into town, stay in a hotel, walk to there on a Shabbat, and make sure that because they said that they're actually closed, we can't trust them. They're lying. They're not closed. They're running the business. And they're putting in treif ingredients into our food. So the mashgiach has to show up on a Shabbos to look in the windows and say, no, they're actually closed. They're really closed. That's the whole idea of appointing a mashgiach. And that's the whole idea of watching wine in the process of when it's being made. So when you have grapes and you crush grapes and you're making wine, what determines that it's a kosher wine? Is there a special bracha that they say over the wine? Are they saying anything special? Are they, we always hear these non-Jews. I hear this all the time. A non-Jew will turn to another non-Jew. I heard this at Costco, actually. I love Costco because you hear the most interesting thing. If you go to Costco and you stand near the chicken department for an hour, maybe you're standing there waiting for them to bring out more chicken. You'll hear conversations. First of all, I've noticed that a lot of Asians go over to the kosher section and they'll pay a little bit more for the chickens. They think that they're better. I'm watching and I'm seeing it. Secondly, I noticed something else. I noticed that they have conversations like, what does it mean, kosher chicken? What does this mean that it's kosher? Or the wine, what is it? Why is this wine kosher? And the other one, 99% of the time says, oh, it's because the rabbi blessed it. How many times have you heard somebody say to somebody else, the rabbi blessed it? So if you say it enough, it must be true. It has to be handled. It's the same idea we talked about bishul, we talked about cooking. There's a whole machloket, a whole debate about whether or not somebody who isn't Jewish can cook in your home, can cook for you. You have to have intervention. You have to do something. The Ashkenazi approach is, if you turn the fire on, you've turned on the stove or put on the gas stove or lit the fire or put the sticks of wood and lit them underneath so therefore I've had something to do with even if you threw a stick into the fireplace where the oven is being lit, you could say, I did something to the process of cooking. That was good enough for the Ashkenazim. The Sephardim were much more strict. They said, no, you've got to actually be doing some of the cooking. You have to go over and see. You have to take a ladle and stir the pot, or you have to drop the dough into the oil yourself. Big machloket in Israel, by the way, on Sufganiyot for Pesach, when they gave a certification to Mahadrin. Everybody thinks Mahadrin is, it's Mahadrin, it must be kosher forever. Mahadrin is not the best hashgacha always. They paskin, Rav Avadia Yosef, who was the chief of the Eidah HaChareda in Israel, said, these Jews in Israel, most of them are not so strict. They're not so strict. So let them have that somebody turned the oil on and will give them a hashgacha. It doesn't matter if a non-Jew is dropping the dough into the oil and it's frying. At least we're there, and it's better that they do that than go and buy treif donuts somewhere. So we'll make it okay. We'll say it's okay. Give them a teudah for kashrut. But then Rav Avadia Yosef says separately to the Sephardic community, he goes, shh, don't tell anybody I said this, but don't buy the donuts at the Mahadrin places. Buy them at the Sephardic places that have a super hashgacha, because then we know that a Jew is actually taking the dough and dropping it into the oil. What he tells the community is one thing, but what he tells his own peeps is another thing. And I find it very interesting because in wine, a Jew has to crush the grapes. Well, I go to a place and I buy a case of grapes. And it's a wine pressing place. You can buy bushels of grapes. Have you ever made wine like that? I have. My father told me when I was about 18, 19 years old, I bought some grapes. And I didn't want to crush. I did with my dad one time with crushing them all by hand. It's tedious. It's not a great job crushing the grapes. I didn't have a press. He said, well, when you go there, ask him if you can press the button to make the press work, so at least you're intervening in the process, the press won't work until you make it work. And that way, by you making the press work, you're pressing the grapes, and therefore your wine will at least be kosher. So if you're going home with this wine, you're going to make wine. You got the juice from the grapes. You go home, and from the juice, now you're going to make wine. By the way, places like Wine Art and places like that, where you buy already the juice, it's not kosher. Not kosher by any stringent, strict standards at all. But if you go to a place where you can see the grapes and you're making the machine work and you're pressing the grapes, that could be considered kosher. But what about the wine that you have in your home that's kosher and you want to serve it and you have family members? I have family members that are not Jewish and we share wine. Am I going to embarrass them? Don't touch the bottle. If you touch the bottle, touch it. If you touch the bottle, it's asur. I can't have any of the wine. Well, that's making people feel badly. That's never what Chazal wanted to do. In fact, it's worse to embarrass somebody. The worst thing in the world is to embarrass anyone. So they came up with a way of saying, what do we do with milk? Milk comes out of a cow, comes out warm, but it doesn't come out cooked. The milk is not yad soledet bo. We learned this term in cooking. We took some sessions and we learned yad soledet bo. We learned that if it's hot enough, that if you put your hand into that pot, your hand would recoil. And how does Gemara determine what is the temperature for yad soledet bo? They said, if it's hot enough to burn a baby's belly, then it's hot enough. No babies were hurt in the making of this discussion today, so we didn't boil any babies' bellies. But the point is that they're saying that's how hot it has to be. Your hand would recoil. Well, oh my goodness. What about milk? I took the milk out of a cow. The non-Jew, I stood up, I sat down, I stood up, I sat down, I stood up. I know it's cow's milk, but the milk is right out of the cow. Well, guess what? We learned that there's something that's very healthy for milk. It's a good idea so we don't get bacteria. It's called pasteurization. Pasteurization, wow. We're going to boil the milk. We're going to treat the milk and boil it so that the milk, by being boiled, will not harm me. It'll be okay. And if you have a mashgiach who supervises that, then it's kosher milk. And even if you don't have a mashgiach that supervises it, commercial milk made today is kosher by Orthodox, by conservative, by Reform, by Reconstructionist, and by anybody's standards. So then why do some people want to buy only Chalav Yisroel? Because they want to make sure that for them it's strict enough that only a Jew was involved in the milking process. Well, why should we be more strict? Why should I get on El Al on the airplane and I'm eating a kosher meal and the guy beside me is having a glatt kosher meal? What kind of nonsense is that? Is my food then not kosher anymore because he's got a glatt kosher meal? I think it doesn't work that way. It works that they're both kosher. But some people have a stricter approach. So we don't make fun of those people. We say a big is in for them if they want a stricter approach. You don't have to do what you don't have to do. My neighbor lights 2 Shabbos candles, I light 3. And then I find out the guy down the street lights 7, I better light 8. You don't have to do more than you have to do. Well, in wine they came up with an approach called what do we call it? Somebody shouted out, I forget the word, it just escaped me, when the wine is pasteurized, when it's boiled. Wine.
Meshuval.
Mevushal.
It just
Mevushal.
So what is it, mevushal? Mevushal, Yain mevushal means that it is brought to a boiling point. So in a sense, it's cooked. And once the wine is cooked, it's treated in a way where if a non-Jew were to reach for it and pour from it, it doesn't render it being not kosher. Well, that's for an Orthodox standard. But yet, if you go to a wedding in Borough Park, this is where I'm going to explain to you how strict the standards are in many places. It's just because something's mevushal means it's good enough for me, it's boiled, I can open the bottle, I can see who unopened it. My non-Jewish sister-in-law can pour herself a glass of wine. I can still reach for the bottle and pour a glass of wine. It's okay. If a wine is not mevushal, you're not supposed to do this. But even in weddings today, the staff, they're serving, are told, do not touch the glasses on the table. The only one that's allowed to touch the glasses on the table or the wine bottle on the table are the people sitting at the table or the mashkiach himself. And the mashkiach himself has to open up every single bottle of wine. Every bottle. And that's why, if you've ever made a bar mitzvah in a core facility like Beth David, or a wedding, or a bat mitzvah, and you gave them a case of wine, you'll notice that when you come home, you said, why did they send me home with 8 bottles that weren't drunk, and every single one of them has been opened, and they put the cork leaving on the top, stuck on the top? They ruined 8 bottles of wine. Why didn't they just open them up as they needed them? Why? Because the mashkiach doesn't have time to do that. He was probably there already on Friday, uncorked them all, and knew that he's going to be Yotzei B'nichnas. He's going to come and show up on Saturday at noon. He doesn't want them opening the wine. So you end up getting back all these bottles that have already been opened. But the act of mevushal, the boiling of the wine, is like the milk that's been pasteurized. It makes it so that it can be handled by non-Jews, even though not everybody respects it. So how do you know if a wine is mevushal? You look on the bottle. And interestingly, when you go to the LCBO, you get to know which wines are and which wines aren't. You know which wines are not mevushal? Most of the more expensive ones. The ones that are $20 and less, $25 and less, are for sure mevushal. The ones that are $60, $70, $80 on the top, the fancy bottles of wine that I can't afford, you look on the back, they're better wines. When you boil wine, you ruin the wine. I don't care what they say. If you've drunk any good non-kosher wine for $20, it's better than any mevushal wine that's $40. Now, I am used to kosher wines. That's what we buy here. And I've gotten used to it, and that's what I drink. I try and buy the best I can get. I look around, I try this one. I go, this one is good for $20. Good enough for me. I don't even drink wine. I don't drink wine. I drink bourbon, because for me, wine gives me nothing but a big headache. There's something in the wine. It doesn't matter, white, red, whatever it is. I drink wine, and the next morning I wake up, it feels like someone took a sledgehammer and hit me on the top of the head. One glass of wine, and I'm finished. The last time that I drank wine was a serious amount of wine, like 2-3 glasses of wine. I was with Alex Roth, and we were honoring Rabbi Shine, who is being honored. What was it? I forget already what it was. President of the RA, maybe? What a great story that was. So I didn't know. I'm a martini drinker. So I had 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 glasses of wine with Alex. And then we went out afterwards when the whole thing was finished. We had a couple of martinis. Not a good idea, I can tell you. But anyway, and there's more to that story. Hey, Alex, we'll leave that out today. But it was nothing schmutzy, but it was a wonderful story. But maybe I should tell the story. It's kind of not funny, but it's funny. But you want to hear the story? We're honoring Rabbi Shine. We're walking out of a vegetarian restaurant. Alex and I went to a vegan, it wasn't even vegetarian, it was a vegan restaurant. First of all, we took a taxi to what we thought was whatever, 33rd and 3rd, but he took us to 3rd and 3rd. So we're in a warehousey area with nothing around. We find a vegan restaurant showing good enough. We don't even know where we are. Now we're in this restaurant. We leave the restaurant, and I'm walking along the street, and I'm talking, Alex, I said, we're going to be late. We have to get to Rabbi Shaim's thing, and we'll walk along. We're going to go along. And I realized all of a sudden I'm talking to myself. I look, Alex, there's no Alex. Alex tripped 30 feet behind me on a pothole on the street and did a face plant. Or did he back? He was back. So I turned around to Alex. Alex is lying on his head and people are stepping over him like he's a mace, and they're walking over him and they're just going by. And I turned to Alex. I go, Alex, are you still? I thought he was dead. Honest to God. So, but he wasn't. He's here today. Baruch Hashem. And Alex, are you okay? You okay? And I'm giving him a slap. He wakes up. He says, I'm all right. And he stands up, and his whole arm was cut. He cut his whole arm on the cement on the sidewalk. So we're walking along, and what are we going to do? Alex, you have to go to the hospital. That you need stitches. You need stitches. I'm not going to the hospital. We'll go to Rabbi Shaim's thing, and I'll worry about it later. No, he goes in. So we get to the center. It was the museum, the Jewish Museum, Holocaust Museum. I think it was there. The reception, the event. And we get there, and he's got a shirt, a white shirt, soaked with blood. They thought there was like an attempted murder happened. I'm walking in with this guy and thinking, we're coming in, we're here to see Rabbi Shaim, and he's dripped. So I go to the counter, and I said, do you have a first aid kit? And they said, no, the first aid kit is only for doctors. So I said, I'm a doctor. So they got the kit, they bring the ticket, here you go, doctor, there you go. I took Alex into the bathroom and I bandaged them all up. I lied, I said I was a doctor. I'm kind of a doctor, I'm a doctor of stories. Anyway, so we bandaged them all up, and Alex is still here today, so I must have done a good job. Anyway, back to wine. We're going to talk a little bit about a lenient opinion and a stringent opinion and a practical application. We know that the strict opinion is that non-Jews are not supposed to tamper or handle your wine. We are supposed to drink kosher wines that were produced by Jewish people, and we are supposed to make sure not to go against those prohibitions because of two reasons. One reason is that it could lead to chatnut, it could lead to intermarriage, and the second reason is because of avodah zarah. Then today, we know that if I bought a non-kosher bottle of wine, I'm not thinking about who made the wine in the plant and I want to go and marry her or him. I'm not interested in who made the wine at the winery in California. There's no way. You had an intimate relationship with the person who made the wine in the old days. But today, I don't have an intimate relationship with the people at Kedem. I don't have an intimate relationship with anybody who works at Behringer's in the wine place. I'm not going to get to know who made the wine, and I'm not going to be marrying them. So that's out the window. The idea of avodah zarah is already out the window. And that's why there's a leniency to drink in situations a non-kosher wine if you're not using it for the purpose of kiddush, of holiness. I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm just suggesting that I knew a conservative rabbi who used to be in Toronto, who was more on the right-wing side, who wore tzitzit, who used to drink non-kosher wines all the time, but not for kiddush. And I found it interesting. For me, I think it's just as easy to buy a kosher bottle of wine and you don't have to worry about it. And if somebody comes to your house and you buy a bottle of mevushal, you don't have to worry about it. So what is the Sephardic opinion? The Sephardic opinion is that any wine that is touched by a non-Jew, period, is absolutely forbidden. It's asur. You can't consume it and you can't benefit from it. That's it. That's it. If it was touched by a non-Jew, and if you're going to derive benefit from it, it's asur, you can't have it. The Ashkenazi opinion says, do you remember this term? We talked about it in my kashrut sessions where I used the term lechatchila. Lechatchila, if it's intentional, it's on purpose, you should not go out and derive benefit from a wine. But there is room to be lenient in a case of need. What's a case of need? A case of need. Somebody gave me a bottle of wine, it wasn't kosher, it's sitting there, I have guests over, and these guests are not from people, maybe they're not even Jewish. And I say, I've got wine, and the wine is not kosher. Do you drink non-kosher wine? I shouldn't encourage it, but it's here if you want it. If they're not Jewish, they won't care. But if they're not Jewish and they're drinking the wine, I'm deriving benefit from it. Well, that's a time of need. I only have one bottle. I'm going to be embarrassed not to serve them wine for supper. I thought, they're coming to my house. I got to give them wine. B'diavad, it's always better to be stringent and not benefit from a wine like that. L'chatchila. But b'diavad, if it was done unintentionally, you didn't have time. There was a snowstorm the other day. I had no wine in the house. People came. I've only got this one bottle of wine. I'm not making kiddush on it. Can someone derive benefit? On the Ashkenazi side, there's much more leniency than on the Sephardic side. So what is the Sephardic side? Who is that? Who represents the Sephardic side? Rav Yosef Karo of Spain. Rav Yosef Karo wrote a book in the beginning called The Beit Yosef. Well, it makes sense. The Beit Yosef, Yosef Karo. Later on, he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. Not to be confused, as I said before, with the Kitzur, the shortened version of the Shulchan Aruch. And in the Shulchan Aruch, later on, appeared commentaries for representing the Ashkenazi community by Rav Moshe Isserles. So when we say to intentionally derive benefit from a non-kosher wine, we're not supposed to do it. But if it happens that it wasn't intentional, it's a situation, the Ashkenazis, which is Rav Moshe Isserles, is much more lenient. That's not always the case, that the Ashkenazi side is more lenient than the Sephardic side. So you have to ask yourself, there's another problem. It's not just about your personal leniencies. You could have a leniency and say, I'm going to drink a wine that isn't kosher for me. But that might not be good for your guests. You might have a frum son. You have a son who's Torah observant and isn't going to drink that kind of wine. So the best thing to do is don't buy those wines. Don't bring those wines in. And then you don't have a problem. You don't have to worry about it. What about the practice of non-Jews who do not practice Avodah Zarah? Remember we said, I walked on the street the other day, I said, who practices Avodah Zarah? Nobody. Well, the Gemara writes that the wine of a ger toshav, a Gentile who has disavowed idolatry, is only forbidden to consume, but not to derive from it benefit, based on the Shulchan Aruch. So, can you give a Muslim or a non-believer non-kosher wine and derive benefit from it? In summation, if you take a look at the rulings, whether it's the strict or the lenient side, both Muslims and people that don't believe in anything at all are categories of non-Jews, right? Neither one of them are Jews. And they have their own religious beliefs, but their religious beliefs do not include idol worship. They don't have idol worship. So therefore, their wine is only forbidden to be consumed, but does not have an isser of hana'ah. So, you can gift it or you can receive it, but you can't consume it. And then there's all these other topics that were brought up. Like what happens in the case of, in Israel, they had a real problem when the early name for them was the Halachaz. We don't use that term anymore. It's actually a derogatory term. And they are Ethiopian Jews. Operation Moses came into Israel, and I forget the second operation. And I think I was on Rabbi Shaim's trip. I don't know if anybody was with me on that trip, but early, I'm talking 20 years ago, that we visited Mevaseret Sion, which is an absorption center for Ethiopian Jews back then, 20 years ago. And I said to some of them, how long do you spend in an absorption center before you go on your own and try and do it on your own? And they look like, Mato Shoalati, what are you asking me? I said, well, like, how long are you here for? Is it a 2-year program or is it a 3-year program? How long do you stay here for? And one of them said, I've been here for 15 years. They moved in. They're too afraid to get out in the world and do, and they're still living there 15 years later. And the surroundings and the facilities were not the best, I have to tell you. But there was a problem because the Harabbanut in Israel was not yet recognizing them as any different. They were like, are they Jews? Are they not Jews? Do we have to take them to the mikvah? They say they're Jewish. Do we have to believe them? Because they were a different kind of Jew. They were not worrying about 613 mitzvot. You know, they got the top 10 and they're happy. And they believed differently. And they had a whole different level of, different way of practicing Judaism. So the Ethiopian Olim, the people that made Aliyah to Israel, who consider themselves to be Jewish, they thought they're coming to a country. You know, when they were told as children about Yerushalayim, all they knew was Yerushalayim shel zahav v'shel nechoshet. They thought they're coming to a place literally that has golden streets and paved with gold, and everybody's going to love us, and we're going to be in the land, the holy land of Israel, and everybody's going to be beautiful. And then they get there, and the Israelis are in their typical fashion, rude, and on their cell phone all the time, and pushing you out of the way. They don't know from lineups in Israel. Nobody knows about queues, about standing in line. There's 3 or 4 standing in front of you here, and one is over here. And one says he's in line. He was over here half an hour ago, but he's in the back now, but he wants your place. They don't have the same way of doing things. I won't say respect. I'll just say a different way. And they were terrified, these Ethiopians that came there. They were scared. And now they're being told that they're a subject of debate of whether or not they're even Jewish. Well, they can't go back home. They have no money. They're stuck in a country. And they're being told, don't touch the wine. Don't touch the wine. You're not Jewish yet. After we take you to the mikveh, then you can touch the wine. That's the way they were treated. So the Rabbanut decided that even until they reach the period of being put into the mikvah, we're not going to do that because they don't worship idols. And therefore, they decided that we won't drink their wine, but we can certainly sit with them with our wine and share with them, and they can touch the bottle and handle the bottle. What about non-practicing Christians in the world? What about people that, you know, I know so many people, they celebrate Christmas. What does that mean? They put up a tree, they have lights, they give presents. Santa Claus, they're not going to church, they're not really celebrating the religious aspects of the birth of Jesus. That isn't the purpose of Christmas for them. The purpose of Christmas for them is you go to Yorkdale and you buy presents and you share gifts. There are Christians that I know that celebrate their Chag the way they celebrate it, but there are many that just say that they're Christians. By the way, there's many Jews that say, I'm Jewish. How do they celebrate Judaism? Don't ask. So, you know, by the way, when those kinds of Jews, originally, according to Chazal, they said, they can't cook for us because they're non-observant Torah Jews. That was changed later on, and they said, well, they can cook for us because they're not going to do anything to destroy our food. They're in our home. They're using our ingredients. Just because they're non-Torah observant, and why? Why did they make that leniency? Think about it. What was the ruling for having the separation? The very first one, chatnut, intermarriage. Well, wait a minute. Just because somebody isn't Torah observant, can I marry their children? 100% you can. They're Jewish. So there's no worry about intermarriage. And therefore, non-Torah observant Jews fall into the category of being Jews. We assume that. We think that that's always the way it was. But it's not always the way it was. There was a period of time in Judaism where it was being questioned. It was a question. If you're non-Torah observant, I can't eat your food, even if you cooked it in my own home. It's a serious question. So if you have a non-practicing Christian who claims to have no connection with their own religion, then they fall into the same category. So Rav Moshe Isserles, known as the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, he ruled that there is room to be strict regarding a Christian that adhered to his own faith. There's room. He's not saying, now, Rav Moshe Isserles and Rav Yosef Karo and many of the great rabbis, when they want to use language that says you can't do something, they don't play games, they know how to say it. I'll say this in every class. When they want to tell you you can't do something, they'll tell you isur, asur, lo yochlim. They'll tell you we can't do it. But when they say, and I find this interesting, they say that regarding Christians that adhered to his own faith, there is room to be stringent. They're not saying you have to be strict about it. They're saying there is room to be stringent. So you don't have to be that strict necessarily. It falls into the same category in a sense of a non-Jew who's completely disconnected from any kind of idol worship. And therefore, their wine is forbidden to be consumed, but there would be no problem at all of deriving benefit from it in other ways. So what are we saying? We're saying that it's not always simple to determine the religious practice of a nominal, somebody who's Christian. How do we determine how strict they are and how firm they are as a Christian? So the correct approach would be, I suppose, is to be strict, lean on the strict side, and just assume that all Christians are indeed full believers in their faith. The same way we don't question a fellow Jew. We don't say, how from is that Jew? We don't, it's none of our business. It's their business. So why should we question a Christian? So that's why you try not to put yourself into that position. So in other leniencies in the Shulchan Aruch, what happens with somebody who intentionally every week violates Shabbat? How do they fall into a category? So somebody is Neshomer Shabbos and they come to your house. For this group here and for me, it's not going to matter. But in the frum world, I wonder how it would be if I went and sat at the table of the Bobover Hasidim, and I'm clean shaven, and maybe I wear a kippah sruga often, and I'm a modern Jew, and I keep Shabbat in my way, not in their way, but in my way, and I'm in their home, I'm a chazan in a shul, and I regard myself as somebody who is deeply rooted in learning and in Judaism. But they have their own standards and their own chumras. So I'm in their home, at their table, on a Friday night or a yontif. The bottle of wine in that home is not mavushal. They're Hasidim. What do they need mavushal for? They're from people. They're sitting there pouring for each other. They can pour their own wine. They're rich. They've got the good stuff. They got the $90 bottles of wine all over the table. I go to reach for the bottle to pour it. Me. They might say to me, wait, Chazan, let me pour the wine for you. See, it's a polite way of saying, let me pour the wine for you because you're not frum enough for me. Let me pour it for you, right? I would not doubt that that would happen. And the reason that I'm saying it is because I don't want anybody to ever feel that they are less a Jew than somebody else, because I've been in that situation, in that position. And it feels very odd. I was with Rabbi Schein one time visiting Borough Park because we went to New York to Manhattan together for something. And I convinced him to stay with me on a Friday night over Shabbos in Borough Park, because I loved going to the yeshiva for Friday night. For the Bub of a Rebbe would come and they'd bring him down into the yeshiva, and the buchers were all on the risers behind, and they'd sing Zmirot, and the Rebbe would come and sit at the shulchan, at the tish, and there the Rebbe does say a bracha over the fruit. The fruit bowls are brought in, an enormous fruit, and set down, and the Rebbe makes a bracha, probably says Borei Priya Eitz, like we all do. And then they pass the fruit around, and everybody gets a little piece of fruit or a scrap or whatever you can get. During COVID, it probably is not happening as much. Mind you, with them, it probably is. And they share the fruit, and it's called sharayim, sharing the fruit. Because when you share something from the Rebbe, it's as if you had the bracha yourself. You know, you shared with the Rebbe. So it was a fascinating, wonderful experience that we shared together. But you know what? When you're with them together, so we're now, it's now Shabbos ended for me. If Shabbos starts at 7 o'clock at night, by 7:05, to me, by 8:05 rather, Shabbos is finished. You know, it's an hour and a few minutes, finished. In the lobby of the hotels in Borough Park, in the Frum hotels, there's two of them. One's a dump and one's quite nice. With him, I stayed in the nicer one. When I stayed by myself, I stayed in the dumpy one. And we were there, and I said to Rabbi Schein, we can do Havdalah. They have Havdalah sets all over the lobby. So you light the candle, you got the spices everywhere, the little sachets, because they know people are leaving the Frum hotel, they got to make Havdalah. They don't want them making it in the room and burning the hotel down, so they have them in the lobby, and everything's there with the juggle. So anyway, here I am, and I go to make Havdalah at 8:05, and all of a sudden I'm surrounded by 100 Hasidim. They're all standing around me. Why? I said to Rabbi Schein, why are they all standing around me, these Hasidim? They don't know how to make Havdalah. So I'm saying, Hashem, and I'm making Havdalah, and they say Amen, and they walk away. So I get the Vach, Shavua Tov, and they walk away. They're so happy. Why are they so happy? Because they were yotzei, they were present for me doing what they already considered to be a violation. They don't make Havdalah until an hour and a half after Shabbat started. They wait a full 30 minutes. So if they're strict, if Shabbat started at 7, they wait until 8:30, 8:35 even, just to make sure. They do a later Havdalah, the Hasidim. So, you know, it's like they have to be, I don't want to, more from than everybody else. They got to be, so they're making a late Havdalah. But if I'm making it, that's okay. They can say Amen to my bracha, and Shabbos is finished for them, because I'm for lack of a better term, I'm the shagets who went ahead and lit the candle when they considered to be Shabbos isn't finished yet, and made a bracha on Havdalah, and they're being part of that presence. So it's an interesting question about who is suggested as being a leniency for being considered on the spectrum of being Jewish, who is accepted that we can derive benefit from, and who cannot, and who is forbidden. But also, don't forget, it's not only laws, because the laws don't give us all of the rules, it's also minhag hamakom. In France, many of the Orthodox Jews eat bread that is not from a kosher bakery. Why? because it's delicious. They want to have a good baguette, and that's who's making the best baguettes. They buy them. They puskined long time ago in France that they can eat any bread they want. But in the rest of the world, we don't do that. So you have to follow what your community does. So a minhag can be as strong as a deen, as a law. Similar. So we find in the words of the Igrot Moshe. So the Igros Moshe is Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the greats of our generation. And in the essence, he says there is much room to be lenient regarding the wine of a non-observant Jew. However, Rav Moshe Feinstein concludes that the minhag, the custom, the accepted practice, the things that we do in this community, he was a New Yorker, is to be strict, to be stringent, and not to drink the wine that was touched or tampered by a Mechalel Shabbos. Wow. That's unbelievable. Do I have to read it again for you? Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying that the accepted practice in New York is to be stringent, not to drink the wine that was touched or tampered with by anyone who violates Shabbat. And maybe that's why if I go to a shulchan, to a table fit for kings with the Bobover Hasidim in Borough Park, that even I, a Jew who likes to learn Torah and likes to study Halachaz, I don't rank to touch their wine. I don't rank to pour their wine. Wait, Chazan, it'd be my honor. Let us pour it for you. That would be the approach. And I find it interesting, right? I say that because if you're ever in that kind of a position, as odd as it might feel, you shouldn't feel badly, but certainly you could feel strangely. So, can a cup of wine, I already poured it, I poured it in the kitchen. Can the cup of wine be given to a non-observant Jew? Based on everything that we talked about, it would seem that you're not supposed to give a cup of wine to a non-observant Jew to drink, since his handling of the wine is going to forbid it from being consumed. One, giving him the wine is equivalent to offering him something that is forbidden for him to drink. And two, it's a transgression of lifnei iver. The Torah prohibits against presenting someone else with an opportunity to perform a prohibited act. So once again, we go to our favorite Rav Moshe Feinstein in New York, and he said, the accepted practice to be strict regarding the wine of a non-observant Jew concerns only whether an observant Jew may drink the wine that a non-observant Jew touched. However, there's no minhag, there's no custom regarding whether one is allowed to give the non-observant wine to drink. And such, one can be lenient. So, what is he saying, Rav Moshe? He's saying again, Judaism always finds leniencies. We always say, I'm going to give you an example of a leniency. I'm the co-president of the Toronto Council of Chazanim because nobody else wants the job. It's like, you know what I mean? Many of you, I'm looking around, have been presidents. Noreen, Doreen, everybody here has been a president because nobody else wants the job. So, you know, when you get asked this question as the head of, I'm the one who puskins for the Chazanim whether or not they're allowed to have a license in Toronto to perform marriages, weddings. Me and Eric Moses. I don't want the job. I want to give it up. I want to give it to somebody else. It's bad news. Why? Because you have to make decisions that somebody else might not be happy about. So what happens is I was asked this question. somebody wants to get married and they want to have the wedding during the time of Sphira, or they want to have the wedding during the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. They're both Jewish. They're both born Jewish. No questions. It doesn't matter if they were converts. They're Jewish. Can you do the wedding? We know that rabbinically it's prohibited to do a wedding during Sphira. We know that it's prohibited to do a wedding during the 10 days of repentance. But the question is, can he do the wedding? Because that's when the couple want to get the Windsor Arms Hotel, let's say. That's when it's available. They want to have that place. It's her dream day. And everybody who's coming in from out of town can be there that weekend because it's a holiday weekend. And we don't care. We're not religious. We don't give a hoot about the 10 days of repentance. We don't even go to shul on Rosh Hashanah. Why should we care? But we're Jewish. Well, they're Jewish, right? Ish. So, can you do the wedding? So my answer to this chazan was as follows. We already know we're not supposed to do the wedding because of the reasons of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, because of the importance of the 10 days of repentance, those important days of awe between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But it doesn't say you can't do it. It just says the rabbis would frown upon it. But the rabbis also make leniencies for such things. Where is the leniencies? How do they come about? For example, they always use the term, if it's a time of great tzorech, well, maybe. Great tzorech means great need. Ani tzarich, great tzorech. If there's a reason of need, and interestingly, what I found unbelievable, and this is the truth, is if you have a kosher wedding during the time of Sphira, and you have it at the Windsor Arms or any other place that you want to have it, you can have a kosher wedding. So that means that Cor, C-O-R, which is providing the mashkiachs for your kosher affair, is providing you with kosher food during the time of Sphira. How can that be allowed? Well, they do it because they say, well, the mashkiach won't be in the room when the music's playing. He's going to leave the room. He's going to stay in the kitchen. He's going to just look into the room from where he is, but he's not going to come in. Because Kor would rather have that you do a kosher wedding than not do a kosher wedding. If you're already going to do it, at least you try and make it kosher. Today, anything flies. Lots of weddings that we do are not kosher. That's the way it is. But if there's a possibility, why not? So we look for great sorach. How do you find great sorach? All right, a time of need. Remember we said, it was a snowstorm, I've got company, it'll be so embarrassing if I don't serve wine. It's the only wine I have. I'm going to notify them what the wine is. They can make their own decision of whether they're going to have it or not. So that becomes a question. So here's an example. The father-in-law of the bride, the father of the bride, was very, very ill. He had weeks to live. The bride wants her father there for the wedding because she doesn't want to get married without having her dad there. But she knows he's going to die anytime very, very soon. If she has the wedding during this time of Sphira, which is tomorrow, I can have a kosher wedding. My father will come because it's kosher. He's dying of cancer. He's going to be able to be at the wedding and see his daughter get married. That's a time of great sorrow. That's a time and a reason to have a wedding. During the time of Sphira. Well, now you're serving kosher wine. You're having a kosher affair. You're having a rabbi officiate at the wedding, or a chazan, or somebody who's licensed and can do it properly. You're doing a proper ketubah. Everything else is according to Hoyle, as they say. So what is the issue? There's a reason for great sorach. there are always reasons for great need, but you have to determine for yourself, is it really a time for great sorach, or are you just trying to show off because you want to have it at the Windsor Arms, and if you don't get it during that time, you got to have it at the place that's not as fancy. Because if it's only because you have to have it at the place that isn't as fancy later, that's what you're supposed to do. I read an interesting tshuva on kashrut, on Haggalah, on kashering something. It's fascinating because the Abaya asked the Rava in the Gemara, he said, what do you do for your cutlery, your knives? What do you do for Pesach? He says, what do you mean, what do I do? I have new. He says, yeah, but Abaya, you're rich. You're loaded. You're a rich rabbi. You can afford new knives, new big fancy knives for Pesach. I don't have your money. I have to kosher all mine and dip them in hot water and Haggalah and boil them and take them out and I use them. And he says, no. You're misunderstanding me. When I say I have new, I mean I make them new. I also dip mine in boiling water. Why does Abeya boil the water and dip his knives if he's so rich to kosher them for Pesach? He does it because, and by the way, I'm guilty of having a separate set of knives. I have other knives that I use for Pesach. I don't want to say I can afford them. I probably can't, but I have the knives. I have them already here, and I have some separate stuff for Pesach, but I do kosher some stuff for Pesach too. I kosher my cutlery. So the Igrot Moshe Feinstein says in a tshuva, he wrote a teshuva on this, and he said, if you think, and he says these words, if you could read the tshuva, if you think that by buying new knives for Pesach, you're doing anything that's more strict, or you're deriving more benefit by getting them because you're having new, or it's better, or it's preferable, or it's more kosher, you're mistaken, you're wrong. Koshering them is exactly the same as buying new. Exactly the same. What he's saying is that in our community, if everyone can't afford to buy new knives, then we shouldn't think about buying new knives. Because guess what? There's a lot of people that can't buy new cutlery and have 4 sets of dishes and 4 sets of this and 5 sets of this. Dishes you can't kosher. But cutlery, knives, forks, spoons, ladles, bowls, pots, you can kosher it. Why should we kosher it? Because everybody can't afford to buy new, so you should kosher it. And you know what's interesting about that is when you kosher it, when you make something kosher for Pesach, it neutralizes it. Once you dip it in the hot water and you boil it and you perform the Haggalah, it's as if it was new. So now it's parv. The knife, the cutlery, the spoon is parv. So you've been wanting for all year to use that knife as a fleshik knife or as a milchik knife. Now's your opportunity to do so. You can do that because you don't have to only rely on the fact that the knife is always going to be that way. All right, I'm going to stop talking, but I want to finish off by saying that in a time of need, in a time of tzorech, there is always room to permit giving wine to a non-Jew or a non-observant Jew to drink, and the reasons for separation with wine. And by the way, now wines are getting better because in kashrut, in the wineries, they're not boiling the wines the same way. Many of them are excellent wines because they've come up with a new boiling process which is called flash boiling. It brings it up extremely quick to the temperature and then drops it down very, very quickly. And because it's a flash pasteurization, it doesn't affect the wine quality in the same way as the old-fashioned way. And that's why kosher wines are winning awards and they're doing so much better. So next week, if you can feel like you want to join more of this nonsense, come back. And we're going to talk about something different. We're going to talk about all of those fancy scotches and bourbons and whiskeys and sherry casks and vodkas and all of the whiskeys. And I'll give you the list and the names of kosher products and non-kosher products, and which liqueurs you can have. And I'll try and squeeze in as much as possible into the next session. Email me if you have questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. And good luck, everyone. And thank you so much for sharing time with me.
Marshall,
Thank you, Marshall.
Yes.
I have a question for clarity. You were talking about lighting Havdalah, and you said when Shabbos starts. Did you mean it had to be 24 hours or something like that?
Okay, so Shabbos starts on Friday, for instance, at 7 o'clock.
Okay,
Saturday night, it's going to end at 1 hour afterwards. Some people, so at 8.
okay,
But some people hold 1 hour and 10 minutes. Some people hold 1 hour and 20. And some people hold an hour and 30. So the Bobover Hasidim, I think, hold an hour and 30. Lubavitch themselves, they try and stick to between an hour and 5 and an hour and 10 minutes. Some people do a machmir 1 hour and 12 minutes because they say they got to be a little bit more strict than the 10 just to make sure that Shabbos is really out. So they do an hour and 12. So everybody has their own custom. The actual law is 1 hour after Shabbos was left. So if you light at 7:05, at 8:05 Shabbos is finished. If you want to be more machmir, then smiles upon you if you want to wait a little bit longer, 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes.
thank you. Thank you for the session. It was excellent.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really
Call
great.
off,
Thank you.
Marshall.
Well, thank you and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marshall. Great job.
Bye, Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.